The Whispering Stones, Whis. The Invitation. Elian Frost had always been able to hear what others could not. As a child, she'd been scolded for responding to voices that weren't there. As an adult, she'd learned to hide this peculiarity, to nod and smile when the whispers came, pretending they were merely thoughts of her own. But the stones of Old Crowley Bridge had been calling her name for weeks now, and their voices were becoming impossible to ignore. Elian Frost, come to us. The invitation repeated itself in her dreams, in the quiet moments between conversations, in the stillness before dawn, when she gazed out her apartment window at the mist-shrouded river that cut through the heart of Ravenwick. The ancient stone bridge, with its 7 weathered arches spanning the murky waters of the Blackthorn River, had stood for over 6 centuries. Local legends claimed it had been built by the fair folk in a single night as payment for a mortal's kindness. Elian had crossed that bridge countless times in her 32 years of life, but never had it spoken to her with such insistence. On a crisp autumn morning, with copper-coloured leaves swirling in the breeze, Elian finally surrendered to the call. Wrapping herself in a moth-eaten woolen coat that had belonged to her grandmother, she set out for Old Crowley Bridge before sunrise. The city slumbered around her, street lamps casting pools of amber light on empty cobblestone streets. Ravenwick was a place where the old and new coexisted in uneasy harmony, medieval structures standing shoulder to shoulder with modern steel and glass buildings. It was a city where history refused to be buried, where the past lingered like a ghost at the edges of contemporary life. Much like the whispers that had followed Elian since childhood. As she approached the bridge, the murmurs grew louder, more distinct. No longer just her name, but fragments of sentences, urgent and overlapping. The veil thins. Danger comes. The Hollow King stirs. Elian hesitated at the foot of the bridge, heart pounding. The stones beneath her feet thrummed with energy she could feel through the soles of her worn boots. Looking up and down the deserted street, she confirmed she was alone before finally asking aloud, "What do you want from me?" The response came not in words, but in visions. Flashes of images that burned behind her eyelids. A silver key turning in an ancient lock. A doorway of swirling light. A crown of thorns floating above an empty throne. And a map etched into the cornerstone of the bridge's northern arch. Drawn forward as if by invisible threads, Elian approached the stone. In the growing light of dawn, what had appeared to be mere cracks and weathering in the ancient masonry revealed itself to her eyes as a detailed map of Ravenwick, not as it was now, but as it had been centuries ago. And there, marked with a spiral glyph that seemed to glow faintly blue, was a location on the edge of what was now Ravenwick Park, where the ruins of the old abbey stood forgotten among tangled vegetation. "Find the door," the stones whispered, "before he does." Sue. The Hidden World. The abbey ruins were cordoned off with faded warning signs and sagging yellow tape, deemed structurally unsound by city officials years ago and largely forgotten. Elian ducked under the barriers, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no early morning joggers or park maintenance workers were watching. The autumn sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the crumbling stone walls and collapsed arches. Brambles and ivy had reclaimed much of the structure, nature slowly erasing the work of human hands. Elian picked her way through the rubble, guided by the mental image of the map. The spiral marking had indicated a spot beneath what would have been the abbey's nave. Now it was little more than an open space surrounded by partial walls, the floor a patchwork of broken flagstones and encroaching grass. Here the whispers confirmed as she reached the centre, "Beneath your feet." Elian knelt and began clearing away dead leaves and debris. Her fingers traced the outline of a large circular stone set flush with the surrounding floor. Unlike the other stones, this one bore no moss or lichen, as if time had somehow forgotten to age it. Around its circumference ran an inscription in a language Elian had never seen before, yet somehow understood. "The doorway opens for those who listen to the stones." She placed her palm flat against the cool surface, and the whispers rose to a crescendo, words overlapping until they formed a single harmonious command. "Speak your true name to the door." Elian hesitated. She had always been simply Elian Frost, orphaned at 7, raised by a grandmother who had passed away a decade ago, living a solitary life as a bookstore clerk. What did they mean by true name? But even as the question formed in her mind, she felt a name rise from deep within her, a name she had never known, yet recognized instantly as her own. "Eleonora Frost Vale," she whispered. The stone beneath her hand warmed, then began to glow with the same faint blue light she had seen in her vision. Slowly, silently, it sank downward and slid aside, revealing a spiraling staircase descending into darkness. For a moment, Elian considered walking away, returning to her apartment, her books, her quiet, predictable existence. But the whispers had changed, becoming almost musical, welcoming, and beneath them was a pull she couldn't resist, like the moon drawing the tide. From her coat pocket, she withdrew the small flashlight she always carried. Its beam seemed feeble against the absolute darkness below, but it was enough to reveal the first few steps. Taking a deep breath, Elian began her descent. The staircase spiraled down for what felt like hundreds of feet, though Elian lost all sense of distance and time as she descended. The air grew neither colder nor warmer, but changed in quality, becoming somehow richer, heavy with scents she couldn't identify, but that reminded her of spring flowers and autumn leaves and winter snow all at once. And then, abruptly, the stairs ended. Elian's flashlight beam revealed a short passage that opened into a vast space beyond. As she stepped forward, the passage widened, and she emerged onto a stone platform overlooking an underground world that stole her breath away. A city spread beneath her, a city of impossible architecture. Towers that twisted like smoke, bridges that arced between buildings like frozen rainbows, streets that spiraled and looped in patterns that defied Euclidean geometry. And light. The entire cavern was illuminated by thousands of glowing blue crystals embedded in the distant ceiling, creating the illusion of a starry night sky. But most astonishing were the inhabitants. As Elian watched, figures moved through the streets below. Some appeared almost human, but others were clearly not. Beings with skin like bark or scales or feathers, some tall and willowy, others squat and sturdy. Some flew between the towers on membranous wings, while others moved in peculiar bounds or glided like shadows. "The hidden folk," Elian whispered, remembering her grandmother's bedtime stories. Tales of the fair ones, who lived beneath hills and beyond mirrors, who could grant wishes or inflict curses, who had once walked openly in the human world before retreating from humanity's iron and disbelief. "The verdant court," corrected a voice behind her. Elian spun around. Standing in the passage she had just exited was a woman. At least, she appeared mostly woman-shaped, though her proportions were subtly wrong. Her limbs slightly too long, her neck too graceful to be human. Her skin shimmered with a faint green luminescence, and her hair moved gently as if underwater, despite the still air. "You are expected, Eleonora Frostvale," the being said, her voice like wind through leaves. "The council has awaited your return for a very long time." "My return?" Elian managed. "I've never been here before." The woman who was not a woman tilted her head at an impossible angle. "Not in this life, perhaps, but blood remembers, even when minds forget." She gestured toward the city below. "Come, Queen Thistledown has called an emergency conclave. The seals are failing, and the Hollow King gathers his forces. We have precious little time." 3. The Conclave. The being introduced herself as Willow, a name that suited her fluid movements and verdant aura. She led Elian along a path that wound down from the platform toward the impossible city below. "What is this place?" Elian asked, struggling to take in the wonders that surrounded her. Buildings that appeared to be grown rather than built, fashioned from living wood and crystal and stone, that pulsed with subtle energy. Streets paved with what looked like river-smooth pebbles that emitted soft, melodic notes when walked upon, creating an ever-changing symphony as the city's inhabitants went about their business. "This is Underwick," Willow replied, "the last great city of the hidden folk in your part of the world. Once, there were many such places beneath human settlements. But as your kind's disbelief grew stronger and iron more prevalent, our realms dwindled. Now, only Underwick remains, sustained by the ancient pact." "What pact?" Elian's attention was momentarily captured by a market stall where tiny dragonfly-winged beings were selling vials of glowing liquid in rainbow hues. "The pact your ancestor struck with Queen Thistledown during the Great Sundering. Eleonora Frost, the first to bear your bloodline's name, was a wise woman of Ravenwick during what your historians call the Black Plague. When humans began to blame our kind for the sickness, hunting us with iron and rowan wood, she negotiated a treaty. We would retreat fully to our realm, and in exchange, a frost would stand as guardian of the doorway, ensuring peace between our worlds. They turned down a narrow side street where the buildings leaned so close together overhead that they formed an arch. Luminous fungi grew in the crevices between stones, providing a soft, bluish light. But something has gone wrong, Willow continued, her pace quickening. The seals that keep the darker aspects of our realm contained have begun to fail, and in the deepest shadows of Underwick, the Hollow King stirs. Who is the Hollow King? Elian asked, though a shiver of recognition ran through her at the name. She had heard it in her dreams sometimes, waking with a sense of dread she could never explain. Willow paused, turning to face Elian fully. Her eyes, Elian noticed for the first time, had vertical pupils like a cat's, their colour shifting between green and gold. There are aspects of the hidden folk that your human tales have forgotten, or chosen not to remember, Willow said softly. Not all of us are of light and growth. Some are of shadow and decay, necessary parts of the cycle, but dangerous when unbalanced. The Hollow King rules those aspects, and he has long resented the pact that confines him to the deeper shadows. Now, with the bloodline of guardians broken for nearly a century, his power grows. Broken? Elian frowned. But I'm here. My grandmother was a Frost, and her mother before her. But none since Eleanora Frost, your great-grandmother, have known their true heritage or taken up the mantle of guardian, Willow explained. The knowledge was lost when she died unexpectedly before passing on the legacy. Your grandmother never knew, nor your mother. They emerged onto a wide plaza, dominated by a massive tree whose trunk was as wide as a house, its crystalline leaves chiming softly in an unfelt breeze. At its base was a structure that seemed to be partly grown from the tree's roots and partly constructed of opalescent stone. An elegant meeting hall with open sides and a domed roof supported by living branches. Inside, arranged in a semicircle, sat the most diverse collection of beings Elian had ever seen. Some nearly human in appearance, save for unusually coloured eyes or pointed ears, others so alien she could barely comprehend their forms. All fell silent as Willow led her into the centre of the conclave. At the heart of the semicircle, upon a throne that appeared to be carved from a single enormous pearl, sat a diminutive woman who couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall. Despite her size, she radiated such presence and power that Elian instinctively dropped to one knee before her. "Rise, daughter of Frost," said Queen Thistledown, her voice surprisingly deep and resonant for her small frame. "We have little time for formalities. The Hollow King's forces gather at the final seal. Already, his influence leaks into your world. Have you not noticed the increase in nightmares among humans? The strange behaviours of animals? The unseasonable storms?" Elian thought of the news reports she'd seen. Unusual weather patterns, an uptick in sleepwalking incidents, pets going missing. Small things that, taken individually, could be explained away, but together. "What can I do?" she asked. "I don't know anything about being a guardian. I don't have any special powers or knowledge." A murmur ran through the assembled council members. Queen Thistledown raised a tiny hand for silence. "You have the blood of the Frost line, which carries power you have yet to discover, and you have the ability that has defined your family for generations. You can hear the voices of things others cannot. The stones, the trees, the very air itself speaks to you, does it not?" Elian nodded slowly. "I've always heard whispers. I thought I was. I don't know. Mentally ill, maybe." "It is a gift," the Queen corrected firmly. "And now you must use that gift to renew the seals before the Hollow King breaks through completely. But first," she gestured to an attendant who stepped forward bearing a small wooden box, "you must accept your inheritance." The box opened to reveal a necklace, a simple silver chain from which hung a key made of what appeared to be crystal or ice, though it didn't melt in the attendant's hands. "This is the Guardian's key, forged from a tear of the moon and a breath of winter. It will open the way to the final seal, and with the proper incantation, renew the binding that keeps the Hollow King in check." As Elian reached for the key, a tremendous boom shook the hall, sending crystalline leaves showering down from the tree above. Cries of alarm rose from the assembly. "He comes!" shouted a being with bark-like skin and antlers sprouting from his brow. "The outer seal has fallen!" 4. The shadow army chaos erupted in the council chamber. The hidden folk rushed in all directions, some taking up positions around Queen Thistledown, others fleeing toward distant doorways. Willow grabbed Elion's arm with surprising strength. "Take the key," she urged, practically shoving the crystalline object into Elion's hand. "We must reach the inner sanctum before the Hollow King's forces overrun the city." The key felt impossibly light in Elion's palm, almost weightless, yet it pulsed with an energy that resonated with something inside her. As her fingers closed around it, knowledge flooded her mind. Fragments of memories, not her own, but her ancestors. Alienora Frost standing on the bridge at midnight, cutting a pact with beings of light and shadow. Generations of Frost women renewing the seals at each equinox. Her own great-grandmother falling ill before she could pass on the legacy, the knowledge dying with her. "This way," Queen Thistledown commanded, suddenly at Elion's side. Despite her diminutive stature, the monarch moved with surprising speed, leading them through a concealed door behind her throne that opened into a narrow passage lit by pulsing blue fungi. Behind them, another boom shook the foundations of Underwick, followed by the sound of shrill, discordant horns. "The Shadow Army has breached the eastern quarter," reported a scout who materialized from the darkness ahead, a slight, agile being with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed amber. They marched toward the center of the city, hundreds at least. "Then we take the old ways," the Queen decided, veering sharply down a side passage so narrow they had to proceed in single file. "Frostvale, stay close. The paths shift for the unwary." Elion struggled to keep up, her mind reeling from the rapid turn of events. Just hours ago, she had been an ordinary bookshop clerk with an unusual ability she'd spent a lifetime hiding. Now she was fleeing through an underground city with magical beings, pursued by a shadow army, carrying an artifact of immense power she barely understood. The passage twisted and branched repeatedly, and Elion quickly lost all sense of direction. The sounds of pursuit faded, then grew louder, then faded again as they navigated the labyrinthine tunnels. At one junction, Queen Thistledown hesitated, her head tilted as if listening. "They've split their forces," she murmured. "Clever, they mean to surround the sanctum." "What exactly is the Hollow King?" Elion asked, using the brief pause to catch her breath. "Willow said he was part of your kind, but of shadow and decay." The Queen's ageless eyes turned to her, filled with a sorrow beyond human comprehension. "Once, long ago, he was my consort," she said quietly. "Oberon, king of the wild hunt, lord of winter and necessary endings. We ruled in balance, I over growth and renewal, he over decay and rest. But when humans began to turn from the old ways, when iron became commonplace and belief in our kind waned, our powers diminished. Oberon changed. The diminishment drove him mad. He sought to restore our powers by force, by making humans believe through fear. We fought a terrible civil war, and in the end we could not destroy him. He was too essential to the balance, but we could bind him to the deepest shadows, allowing only his most benign aspects to influence the world above." Another distant boom interrupted her explanation. The obsidian scout reappeared, his expression grave. "They've taken the western approach, Your Majesty. Our defenders fall back to the inner ring." "We must hurry," Willow urged. They resumed their flight through the tunnels, which gradually began to slope downward. The air grew colder, and the blue fungi gave way to clusters of pale, ghostly mushrooms that emitted a soft silver light. The stone walls were increasingly interspersed with veins of a black, glass-like mineral that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Shadow quartz," Queen Thistledown explained, noticing Elion's wary glance at the dark veins. "We approach the border zones between our realm and the Hollow King's. The minerals here reflect the nature of both domains." After what seemed like hours but might have been minutes, time moved strangely in this place. They emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking a vast cavern. Unlike the warm, starry ceiling of Underwick, this space stretched into infinite darkness overhead. Below them lay a desolate plain of black sand, and in its center, a structure that defied comprehension. A perfect circle of standing stones, each as tall as a skyscraper, surrounding a pool of what appeared to be liquid shadow. "The final seal," Queen Thistledown whispered. "The last barrier between the Hollow King's prison and our realm." Across the plain, movement caught Elian's eye. A procession of figures emerged from a distant tunnel, tall, emaciated beings with skin like tarnished silver and antlers of black glass. They moved with an unsettling grace, and at their center walked a figure that made Elian's heart stutter with primal fear. Taller than the others by half, the central figure wore armor that seemed to be fashioned from fragments of midnight. A crown of twisted thorns sat upon his head, and where his face should have been was only a swirling void, as if a piece of the starless sky had been cut into the shape of a face. "Oberon," breathed Queen Thistledown, a complex mixture of emotions in her voice: sorrow, anger, and something like longing. "The seals already weaken," Willow observed, pointing to the standing stones. Elian saw that hairline fractures ran through several of them, glowing with a sickly purple light. "If they reach the central pool before we can renew the binding, then all is lost," the Queen finished grimly. "The balance will shift irreparably. The Hollow King will extend his domain into both our realm and the human world above. An age of unnatural shadow will fall, not the healthy darkness of restful night, but a consuming void that devours light and hope." Elian clutched the crystal key, which had begun to pulse more rapidly against her palm, almost in time with her accelerated heartbeat. "What do I need to do?" she asked, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Queen Thistledown turned to her, a flicker of hope kindling in her ancient eyes. "You must reach the center of the circle before they do. Use the key to unlock the binding stone beneath the shadow pool. Speak the words that come to your blood's memory, and pour your intent into the renewal of the seals. But," she hesitated, "it will require sacrifice. The binding is powered by freely given essence. In the past, your ancestors gave a year of their life with each renewal. Given how long the seals have gone untended, it will demand more." "How much more?" Elian asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "All of it," Willow said softly. "Or nearly so. You may survive, but you will be bound to the seals for the remainder of your days. You will not be able to return to the human world for more than brief periods. Unless," Queen Thistledown began, then fell silent. "Unless what?" Elian pressed. "Unless another of sufficient power willingly shares the burden," the Queen said reluctantly. "But that is not a thing to be asked or expected." Below them, the Hollow King's procession had reached the outer edge of the stone circle. As the first of his followers stepped between the monoliths, a ripple of dark energy pulsed outward, causing another fracture to appear in the nearest stone. "We have no more time," the Obsidian Scout warned. "They will reach the center within minutes." "There is a faster way down," Willow said, pointing to what looked like a natural chimney or shaft in the cavern wall near their ledge. "But it is a direct descent, with no climbing holds." Queen Thistledown nodded. "I can weave a slow-fall charm, but only for one. The rest of us must take the longer path and try to intercept the Shadow Army." Elian stared at the distant central pool, then at the advancing forces of the Hollow King. The choice crystallized in her mind with sudden clarity. All her life, she had felt out of place, hearing voices others couldn't, sensing things beyond the ordinary world. Now she understood why. This was her purpose, her inheritance. "I'll do it," she said. "Show me the way." The final seal. The shaft was a straight drop into darkness. As Queen Thistledown completed her charm, a complex gesture, accompanied by words in a language that seemed to bend around Elian's ears, without quite resolving into comprehensible sounds, Elian felt a strange lightness infuse her body. "You will fall slowly," the Queen explained, "like a leaf drifting from a tree in autumn. But once you reach the bottom, the charm will dissipate. You must reach the central pool before Oberon's forces. We will try to delay them, but their numbers are great." Willow clasped Elian's hand briefly. "Remember, the key must be turned counterclockwise 3 times in the lock beneath the pool. The words will come to you when you hold the key in the lock. Do not hesitate. Once begun, the ritual must be completed, or the backlash of energy could destroy you and shatter the remaining seals entirely." Elian nodded, her throat too tight for words. The gravity of what she was about to do what she was potentially sacrificing hit her fully. Her quiet life in Ravenwick, her small apartment filled with books, the future she had imagined for herself, all of it possibly gone forever. But when she thought of the alternative, the Hollow King bringing his realm of shadow into the human world, the suffering that would follow, she knew there was no real choice at all. "Go now," Queen Thistledown urged, "and know that whatever happens, you honor the legacy of your bloodline." Elian took a deep breath and stepped into the void. The descent was both terrifying and strangely peaceful. As promised, she fell with the gentle, swaying motion of a leaf, drifting through darkness, broken only by occasional veins of shadow quartz in the shaft walls. The crystal key pulsed against her skin, growing warmer, almost seeming to sing to her in a voice just beyond hearing. After what felt like both an eternity and an instant, her feet touched the black sand of the cavern floor. Immediately, the sensation of lightness left her, and ordinary gravity reasserted itself with jarring suddenness. Elian stumbled, regained her balance, and oriented herself toward the massive stone circle. From ground level, the standing stones were even more imposing, titanic monoliths of a material that resembled black marble shot through with veins of silver. Each bore intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly, like optical illusions or half-remembered dreams. Between Elian and the circle stretched about 100 yards of open ground. To her right, perhaps a quarter-mile distant, she could see the Hollow King's procession moving between two of the standing stones. To her left, much further away, figures that might have been Queen Thistledown's party emerged from a tunnel in the cavern wall. Gathering her courage, Elian ran. The black sand shifted treacherously beneath her feet, each step requiring more effort than it should. It was like running through loose beach sand, except this substance seemed almost to cling to her boots, reluctant to let go. She realized with a chill that the ground itself was under the influence of the Hollow King, actively working to slow her progress. Halfway to the circle, a sound reached her, a hunting horn whose note was so low and dissonant it made her bones vibrate painfully. She risked a glance to her right and saw that the Hollow King had spotted her. He raised a gauntleted hand, and several of his silver-skinned hunters broke off from the main group, loping toward her with inhuman speed. Elian pushed herself harder, her lungs burning. The key around her neck blazed now, hot enough that it should have burned her skin, but somehow didn't. Instead, its heat seemed to flow into her, lending strength to her tired muscles. The sand beneath her feet grew firmer, responding to the key's power, allowing her to increase her pace. She reached the outer perimeter of the stone circle just as the first of the hunters closed in. Without thinking, acting on instinct, she grasped the key and thrust it forward. A flash of blue-white light erupted from it, and the hunter recoiled with a shriek that hurt Elian's ears, its silver skin smoking where the light had touched it. No time to marvel at this development. Elian dashed between two of the standing stones, feeling a tingling energy wash over her as she crossed the threshold. Inside the circle, the air was different, heavier, charged with potential. Each breath felt like inhaling lightning. The central pool lay 20 yards ahead, a perfect circle of what appeared to be liquid darkness, its surface unnaturally still despite the disturbances around it. As Elian approached, she saw that it wasn't truly liquid, but something more akin to a hole in reality itself, a window looking into infinite shadow. At the pool's edge was a small stone pedestal she hadn't been able to see from a distance. Set into its top was a keyhole made of the same black glass-like material as the veins in the cavern walls. Behind her, more hunting horns sounded. The rest of the Hollow King's forces had entered the circle and were converging on the center. She had perhaps a minute at most. Elian knelt by the pedestal, removed the crystal key from around her neck, and aligned it with the keyhole. The moment the key touched the lock, whispers filled her mind. Not the familiar whispers of stone and wood she had known all her life, but the voices of her ancestors, dozens of frostwomen reaching back through centuries. Turn the key 3 times counterclockwise and speak the binding. As she began to turn the key, the world around her seemed to slow. The approaching footsteps of the shadow hunters became distant, muffled. The key moved with surprising resistance, as if she were turning it not in a lock, but through thick honey. One complete turn. The pool of shadow began to stir, its perfect stillness disturbed by ripples that moved inward rather than outward, converging at the center. Two complete turns. The standing stones began to hum, a deep resonance that Elian felt in her very marrow. The fractures that had appeared in several of the monoliths began to glow not with sickly purple, but with the same blue-white light as the key. Three complete turns. The shadows in the pool parted like a curtain, revealing beneath them a swirling nexus of energy. Neither light nor darkness, but something more fundamental, the raw stuff of reality itself. And in that moment, as the key completed its third rotation, the words rose to Elian's lips. By frost and flow, by stone and star, by blood freely given, I bind thee. Power surged through the key into her hands, up her arms and throughout her body. It was pain and pleasure at once, a sensation beyond either, the feeling of being simultaneously unmade and reforged. Elian gasped, nearly losing her grip on the key, but forced herself to continue. What was sundered shall be sealed. What was broken shall be bound. By my blood, by my breath, by my years unspent, I renew the ancient pact. The energy crescendoed, and Elian felt something being drawn from her. Not her physical strength, but something deeper, more essential. Years of her life, possibilities unrealized, futures unfulfilled, all flowing into the key, into the lock, into the foundations of the seal itself. As her vision began to darken at the edges, a hand fell upon her shoulder, small but strong, radiating power older than human civilizations. Not alone, said Queen Thistledown. The burden is shared. The Queen knelt beside her, placing her own tiny hand atop Elian's on the key. Immediately, the draining sensation lessened as the immortal being channeled some of her own essence into the ritual. By crown and root, by light and shadow in balance kept, I add my power to this binding, the Queen intoned. A third hand joined theirs, Willow's green-tinged fingers completing the circuit. By branch and leaf, by spring's first bud and autumn's last fruit, I lend my strength to this seal, she added. More of the hidden folk gathered around them, each adding their touch and their words to the ritual, sharing the burden that would have consumed Elian entirely. Their voices blended into a harmony that resonated with the humming stones, creating a symphony of renewal. But as the ritual neared completion, a shadow fell across them. Elian looked up to see the Hollow King looming over the pool, his void face a well of hunger and rage. His hunters hung back, unable to approach the blinding light now emanating from the keystone. But their master pressed forward, reaching toward the key with fingers that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. This imprisonment ends today, he said, his voice like gravel grinding on ice. The world has forgotten us, diminished us. I will make them remember. I will make them believe again, through fear if necessary. Oberon, Queen Thistledown said, her voice filled with ancient sorrow. This is not the way. This has never been the way. You would have us fade to nothing, he accused. Become less than memories, less than myths. We adapt, the Queen countered. We change, as we always have. The Hollow King's hand closed around the key, attempting to halt the ritual, to reverse the binding. Darkness flowed from his fingers, battling against the blue-white light. For a moment, the energies warred, perfectly matched, neither able to overcome the other. Elian felt the balance tipping, the seal beginning to weaken again under the Hollow King's direct assault. In desperation, she reached for the one power that had always been hers, her ability to hear and speak to that which others could not. Oberon looked down at his hands again, turning them over in wonder. The armor of midnight he had worn now had subtle highlights of silver running through it, like stars glimpsed through cloud cover. I feel different, he said, his voice uncertain. The rage, the hunger, they're still there, but muted, contained. As they should be, the Queen replied. Your nature is not evil, Oberon. Shadow is necessary. Endings are necessary. Winter is necessary. But they must exist in balance with light, beginnings, and spring. The remaining shadow hunters had dropped to one knee, their antlered heads bowed, responding to the change in their master. The oppressive atmosphere that had permeated the cavern was lifting, replaced by something more neutral, not warm or welcoming, exactly, but no longer actively hostile. Willow helped Elian to her feet. Are you all right? She asked, concern evident in her luminous eyes. Elian took a moment to assess herself. She was drained, certainly, but not in the way she had expected. It wasn't physical fatigue, but something deeper, as if she had given away pieces of her future and received something else in return. "I'm changed," she finally answered. "But yes, I think I'm all right." Queen Thistledown turned to her, a gentle smile softening her ancient face. "You have given much today, Eleonora Frostvale, more than any guardian has been asked to give in generations, but you have not lost everything." "What exactly have I lost?" Elian asked. "And what have I gained?" The Queen approached, taking Elian's hands in her tiny ones. "You have given perhaps half your mortal span, 30 or 40 years that might have been yours. In return, your connection to the hidden world has been strengthened beyond measure. You will hear not just whispers now, but full voices. You will see what others cannot, and you may walk between worlds as you choose, though you will be bound to return here regularly to maintain the seal." "Half my life," Elian repeated softly. It was both more and less than she had expected to sacrifice. Not an immediate end, but a significant shortening of her future. Yet strangely, she felt no regret, only a quiet acceptance. Oberon stepped forward, his movement hesitant, like someone relearning how to walk. "I too owe you a debt," he said to Elian. "Though I raged against this binding, I can see now that it was my madness speaking. The imbalance had distorted me." He reached out a hand, stopped, seeking permission with his gaze. When Elian nodded cautiously, he touched a finger to her forehead. "I cannot restore what you have given freely," he said, "but I can offer a gift in return. From this day forward, no shadow will harm you. You may walk the darkest paths without fear. Neither nightmare nor despair will touch your heart. And when your shortened span of years comes to its close, your passing will be gentle, a quiet transition from one realm to the next." A cool sensation spread from his touch, like a splash of water on a hot day, refreshing rather than chilling. Elian felt some of her fatigue lift. "Thank you," she said, meaning it. Queen Thistledown glanced between Oberon and Elian, her expression thoughtful. "The binding ritual has awakened something long dormant," she observed. "Perhaps there is hope for more complete restoration than I had dared dream." She turned to address the assembled hidden folk, her voice carrying effortlessly through the vast cavern. "Let it be known throughout Underwick and the Shadow Realm that the ancient pact is renewed, the guardian bloodline is re-established, and," she added with a significant look at Oberon, "a new accord may yet be possible between our divided courts." A murmur ran through the gathered beings, not celebration exactly, but a collective exhalation of relief. The tension that had hung over everything dissipated like morning mist. "What happens now?" Elian asked. "Now," said Willow, "we return to Underwick. There is much to rebuild, much to restore, and you, Guardian, must learn what your new role entails." Elian glanced toward the shaft through which she had descended, wondering how they would ascend again. "This way," Queen Thistledown said, gesturing toward a different passage that Elian hadn't noticed before. "The paths between realms flow more freely now that the seal is restored." As they prepared to leave, Oberon spoke once more. "I will return to my domain," he said. "There is healing needed there as well. But I would request a conclave at the next full moon to discuss terms of cooperation between our courts." The Queen inclined her head in agreement. "Until then, King of Necessary Endings." "Until then, Queen of Renewal," he replied, the formality holding a trace of their ancient connection. As Oberon and his hunters departed toward another passage, Elian felt a subtle shift in the air, like the change in atmospheric pressure before a storm breaks, but in reverse. A tension she hadn't fully registered until it was gone. With the Queen leading the way, they left the circle of standing stones. Elian cast one last glance back at the central pool, which now gently pulsed with alternating light and shadow, perfectly balanced. The 7. Between Worlds. The return journey to Underwick was markedly different from their desperate flight to the final seal. Where before the tunnels had felt constricting and maze-like, now they seemed to open welcomingly before them. The luminous fungi lining the walls glowed more brightly, and Elian noticed details she had missed earlier. Intricate carvings in the stone, tiny niches containing offerings of flowers and crystals, patches of moss that formed patterns too regular to be natural. And she could hear them now, not just whispers, but clear voices. The stones told her of their ancient formation, of the patient pressure of Earth that had created them over millennia. The crystals sang of light captured and transformed. Even the air itself seemed to murmur stories of all it had touched. "It's overwhelming," she admitted to Willow as they walked. "Your senses have been expanded," Willow explained. "In time, you'll learn to filter, to focus only on what you wish to hear." When they emerged into Underwick proper, Elian gasped. The city was even more beautiful than she had glimpsed during her first hurried visit. With the threat of the Shadow Army removed, the hidden folk had emerged from hiding. The streets were filled with beings of every description, some celebrating, others beginning repairs on structures damaged during the brief incursion. Most paused to bow or offer gestures of respect as their party passed. Word of what had happened at the final seal was spreading rapidly through the city. Queen Thistledown led them to a slender tower near the heart of Underwick, a graceful spire that seemed to be constructed from intertwined branches of silver and living wood. Inside, a spiral staircase wound upward. "These will be your quarters when you stay in Underwick," the Queen explained as they ascended. Every guardian has maintained a residence in both realms. The chamber at the top of the tower took Elian's breath away. Circular in shape, its walls were formed of what appeared to be living crystal that shifted between transparency and translucence, offering varying views of the city below. Furnishings of exquisite craftsmanship, a bed whose frame resembled flowing water frozen in mid-ripple, chairs that might have grown from the floor itself, tables inlaid with patterns of luminous stone, filled the space without cluttering it. But most striking was the central feature, a pool similar to the one at the final seal, but smaller, and filled not with shadow, but with what looked like liquid starlight. "A scrying pool," Queen Thistledown said, noting Elian's curious gaze. "It will allow you to see into the human world when you are here, and into our realm when you are above." "How often will I need to be here?" Elian asked, running her fingers along the edge of the pool. "The seal must be tended at each quarter and cross-quarter day," Willow answered. 8 times yearly. Between those times, you may live in either realm as you choose, though you may find that extended periods away from Underwick become uncomfortable. "Your connection to this place is part of you now," the Queen added. "Like a tree whose roots have found rich soil, you will flourish best when nourished by both worlds." Elian moved to one of the crystal walls, gazing out at the impossible city spread below. It was beautiful, magical in the truest sense, yet she couldn't help but think of her small apartment in Ravenwick, her job at the bookshop, the simple life she had known. "I can still go back?" she asked. "To my home, my job?" "Yes," Queen Thistledown assured her, "though you may find certain adjustments necessary. Your perception has been altered. You will see our kind walking in your world now, those who choose to venture above. You will hear the voices of things more clearly than ever before." "That might make me seem even stranger to other people than I already did," Elian said with a wry smile. "Perhaps," Willow acknowledged. "But you may find that your enhanced abilities bring unexpected benefits as well." A soft chime sounded, and a small, bird-like being fluttered in through an opening in the ceiling. "Your Majesty," it chirped to the Queen, "the Council awaits your return. There are matters requiring immediate attention." Queen Thistledown nodded. "I must attend to the governance of Underwick," she told Elian. "Willow will remain with you to answer your questions and help you adjust to your new role. Tomorrow, when you are rested, we will begin your formal instruction as Guardian." After the Queen departed, Elian explored her new quarters more thoroughly, marveling at details that revealed themselves upon closer inspection. The way certain crystals in the walls responded to her touch by changing color, the subtle fragrance emanating from flowers she couldn't name. The perfect temperature of the room, despite the absence of any visible heating system. "This is all so," she gestured helplessly, unable to find adequate words. "Different?" Willow suggested with a smile. "It was the same for the first Alienora, your ancestor. She documented her experiences in journals that have been preserved in the Underwick Library. Perhaps you would like to read them sometime." "I would," Elian said, surprised by how appealing the idea was. To know that someone else had navigated this strange transition, to read their thoughts and feelings about it, that would be immensely comforting. For now, though, Willow continued. You should rest. The ritual took much from you, even with our combined assistance. Elian realized suddenly that she was indeed exhausted, a bone-deep weariness settling over her. The bed, with its shimmering coverlet that resembled a pool of water touched by moonlight, looked increasingly inviting. Will you show me how to return to Ravenwick in the morning? She asked as she sank onto the edge of the bed. There are things I need to take care of, people who might worry if I simply disappear. Of course, Willow assured her. The passage between worlds is simple for a guardian to navigate. You'll find it becomes almost instinctual with practice. As Willow moved to leave, Elian called after her. Willow, what would have happened if I hadn't come when the stones called me? If I'd ignored them? The verdant woman paused in the doorway, her expression solemn. The Hollow King would have broken through completely. Shadow would have begun to consume light. In your world, it would have manifested as a gradual increase in despair, in cruelty, in the darker aspects of human nature. Not all at once, but steadily, inexorably. Weather patterns would have shifted toward permanent gloom. Plants would have struggled to grow. Joy would have become a rare commodity. She stepped back into the room, her eyes holding Elian's. But you did come. You answered the call, and in doing so, you have preserved the balance for another generation at least. After Willow left, Elian lay back on the bed, which adjusted itself to perfectly support her body in a way no human-made mattress ever had. Through the crystal walls, she could see the lights of Underwick glimmering like earthbound stars, and beyond them, the distant ceiling of the vast cavern with its embedded blue crystals mimicking a night sky. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her for a time as her mind processed everything that had happened. In a single day, her life had been completely transformed. She had discovered her heritage, visited a hidden realm, faced a Shadow King, performed an ancient ritual, and accepted a role as guardian of the balance between worlds, and sacrificed half her natural lifespan in the process. Yet strangely, she didn't feel diminished by that sacrifice. If anything, she felt expanded, as if in giving up years of ordinary existence, she had gained access to experiences and knowledge beyond anything she could have imagined. Eventually, lulled by the gentle sounds of the city below and the soft luminescence of her new quarters, Elian drifted into sleep. Her dreams were vivid, filled with images of women who resembled her. Frost women through the centuries, guardians who had come before. They didn't speak, but their presence felt like a welcome, an acknowledgement, an acceptance into their lineage. For 2 lives. Elian woke to a gentle chiming sound and the sensation of sunlight on her face, which confused her momentarily. Wasn't she underground? Opening her eyes, she found that one section of the crystal wall had become completely transparent, revealing not the cavern of Underwick, but a view of Ravenwick Park bathed in morning light. Willow entered, carrying what appeared to be a tray of food, though the fruits and breads upon it were unlike any Elian had seen before. A window between worlds, Willow explained, noticing Elian's puzzled expression as she set down the tray. Your chambers exist simultaneously here and in your world, though the entrance points differ. That is how a guardian lives in both realms. Elian sat up, intrigued. So this tower exists in Ravenwick too? In a manner of speaking, in your realm, it manifests as a part of the old abbey ruins, a section that most humans cannot perceive. When you wish to return to your ordinary life, you will step through that view, as if through a doorway, and emerge in the ruins. To return here, you would come back to that same spot. The food was delicious. Berries that burst with flavor more intense than anything Elian had ever tasted. Bread that seemed to contain the essence of summer fields. A drink that refreshed like mountain spring water, but left a pleasant warmth in its wake. After she had eaten and dressed in clothes that had been provided for her, fabrics that felt like a second skin, somehow both substantial and weightless, Willow guided her through the tower and out onto the streets of Underwick. Today, I'll show you the basics of navigating between realms and how to modulate your enhanced perception in the human world, Willow explained as they walked. Your formal instruction in the duties of a guardian will begin tomorrow. They spent the morning exploring Underwick, Elian marveling at the variety of beings that inhabited the hidden city. There were the tall, willowy folk like Willow, with their plant-like qualities. Smaller, quick-moving beings with features reminiscent of various animals. Creatures of living stone or crystal, and many others defying simple categorization. All regarded her with curiosity, respect, and sometimes a touch of awe. Word of her role in restoring the seal had spread quickly. At midday, they arrived at a small courtyard tucked between buildings. At its center stood a circular archway made of intertwined branches that formed an intricate knotwork pattern. Through the arch, instead of the continuation of the courtyard, Elian could see the Abbey ruins in Ravenwick Park. "This is a permanent passage," Willow said. "There are several throughout Underwick, but as Guardian, you will eventually learn to create temporary doorways when needed." Elian approached the arch cautiously. "I just walk through?" "With intent," Willow specified. "Focus on your destination, on your desire to be in the human realm. The passage responds to the Guardian's will." Taking a deep breath, Elian stepped forward, concentrating on the familiar ruins she had visited just the day before, though it felt like a lifetime ago. As she passed through the arch, there was a moment of disorientation, a brief sensation of being nowhere and everywhere at once, and then her foot touched grass instead of stone. She was back in Ravenwick, standing among the Abbey ruins. The morning sun cast long shadows across the overgrown site, birds sang in nearby trees, and in the distance, she could hear the sounds of the city awakening: car engines, faint music from somewhere, voices of early park visitors. Turning back, she saw that the archway was still visible to her, though it now appeared weathered, ancient, almost crumbling. How it would look to human eyes, she realized, if they could see it at all. Willow stepped through to join her, her appearance subtly shifting as she did so. Her green luminescence faded, her proportions adjusted to appear more human, though there remained something otherworldly about her that a careful observer might notice. "Now," Willow said, "let us walk through your city, and I will teach you how to manage what you perceive." The world Elian had known all her life was transformed through her enhanced senses. Buildings that had seemed ordinary now revealed hidden aspects. Symbols carved into cornerstones, patterns in brickwork that formed words in ancient languages, doorways and windows visible only to her new sight that opened into spaces between the human and hidden realms. And the whispers had become conversations. Trees discussed the changing seasons among themselves. Stones recounted the feet that had walked upon them over centuries. The river that ran through Ravenwick murmured stories of its journey from mountain to sea. Most startling were the hidden folk walking openly among humans, unnoticed by all except Elian. A being with fox-like features tended a small urban garden, encouraging plants to grow with whispered words. A pair of tiny winged entities flitted between flowers in a shop window display, collecting something invisible to ordinary eyes. A tall, gaunt figure in an impeccable but oddly old-fashioned suit stood at a street corner, observing the passing humans with ancient eyes. "There are so many," Elian marveled. "Have they always been here?" "Always," Willow confirmed, though their numbers have dwindled over the centuries as human disbelief has grown stronger. Those you see are the ones who prefer the human realm, who have adapted to its iron and concrete and disbelief. And no one else can see them? Some can, young children mainly, before they are taught what is real and what is not. Artists, occasionally, whose perception runs deeper than the ordinary. Those under the influence of certain substances that temporarily lift the veil. And sometimes, those in the moments between life and death, when the boundaries between realms grow thin. They reached Elian's apartment building, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and large windows. As they climbed the stairs to her third-floor unit, Elian wondered what her small home would look like through her new eyes. The answer was both subtle and profound. The apartment itself was unchanged, but she could now see traces of energy where her hands had touched things repeatedly. The doorknob, her favorite coffee mug, the spines of well-loved books. The plants on her windowsill practically sang with life, greeting her return. Even the dust motes dancing in the sunlight seemed to follow patterns that held meaning she could almost grasp. "You will need to learn to filter," Willow advised, seeing Elian's overwhelmed expression. "Like focusing a camera lens, bringing certain things into clarity while allowing others to blur into the background." Over the next several hours, Willow taught her techniques to control her perception, methods of concentration, visualization exercises, simple incantations that helped narrow or widen her awareness as needed. It was exhausting mental work, but by late afternoon, Elian could walk down a busy street without being bombarded by every voice and hidden pattern. "What about my job?" she asked as they sat in her small kitchen, drinking tea. "My life here? That is for you to decide," Willow said. Many guardians have maintained human occupations and relationships. Some found it easier to create a life that allowed for frequent absences, freelance work, or positions that could be done remotely. Others were more forthright, establishing themselves as eccentric figures in their communities, their periodic disappearances attributed to research trips or spiritual retreats. Elian thought about the bookshop where she worked. She loved it there, among the stories and the quiet customers who shared her appreciation for the written word. Perhaps her manager would be open to a more flexible arrangement. "And relationships?" she asked hesitantly. "Friends, potential partners?" Willow's expression softened. "Those are more complicated. Close relationships require honesty, yet the secret of the hidden world cannot be shared widely. Previous guardians have approached this differently. Some chose partners who showed a natural sensitivity to the unseen and gradually introduced them to the truth. Others maintained a certain distance in their human relationships, saving their deeper connections for those in Underwick. It is a balance each guardian must find for themselves. By evening, Elian had called her manager, explaining that she had experienced a family emergency that would require periodic absences in the coming months, and asking if a more flexible work arrangement might be possible. To her relief, the conversation went well. She was a valued employee, and accommodations could be made. As twilight settled over Ravenwick, Elian and Willow stood once more at the Abbey ruins. The permanent passage was clearly visible to Elian now, though to passing park visitors, it was just another crumbling arch among the ruins. "Tomorrow, you will begin learning the specific duties of a guardian," Willow said. "The maintenance of the seals, the protocols for dealing with breaches between realms, the history you must know." Elian nodded, feeling both trepidation and a growing excitement. "It's a lot to take in," she admitted. "Yesterday morning, I was just Elian. Now I'm a guardian of an ancient pact between worlds, with a shortened lifespan and abilities I barely understand." "Yet you seem to be adapting remarkably well," Willow observed. "Perhaps because, at some level, you always knew you were meant for something more. The whispers have followed you all your life, after all." It was true, Elian realized. Despite the shock and occasional moments of grief for the normal life she was partly leaving behind, there was also a sense of rightness to all of this, as if she had been walking slightly out of step with the world her entire life, and now had finally found the correct rhythm. "Will I see the Hollow King again?" she asked suddenly. Willow gave her a curious look. "Most likely. As guardian, you will interact with both courts, the Verdant and the Shadow. Does that concern you?" "No," Elian said, surprising herself with the truth of it. There was something about him, even in his darkened state, something wounded rather than evil, and afterward, when the balance was restored. "He is ancient and complex," Willow said carefully, "necessary to the balance, as all aspects of Shadow are, but not to be approached lightly or without proper preparation." They stepped through the arch together, returning to Underwick as the first stars appeared in the Ravenwick sky. The transition was smoother this time, Elian's intent flowing naturally into the passage between realms. As they walked back toward her tower, Elian gazed up at the crystal-studded ceiling of the vast cavern, its blue lights mimicking the night sky she had just left. Two worlds, both now her home. Two lives, intertwined like the branches of the passage arch. It would not be easy, this path she had inherited and chosen. But for the first time since the stones of Old Crowley Bridge had first whispered her name, Elian felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as Eleanora Frostvale, guardian of the balance, keeper of the whispering stones. And somewhere deep beneath the streets of Ravenwick, in chambers untouched by human feet for centuries, the ancient stones continued their eternal conversation, now including her name among those they honoured. Eleanora Frostvale, guardian, balance keeper, bridge between worlds. The whispers would always be with her. But now, at last, she understood what they meant. The end.